Recently, I got myself a late 2014 to mid 2015 5K, it's really a 4K, 27-inch iMac. And as you can tell by MSI Afterburner here, the GPU is very, very hot. So the thermal paste needs to be reapplied. With that said, if the memory or the core clock is actually to be believed, it's maintaining its core clock. With that said, obviously CFCs running on this old hardware is not exactly the best. I'm running at 720p medium. Now, that's mainly due to the fact that there are no drivers for the GPU in this thing. I have to rely on the drivers that Apple made for this, like in, again, 2014 to 2015. The fact CFCs even runs on this thing in the first place is a miracle, let alone that I'm getting 60. But with that said, at the very least, I need to reapply thermal paste on both the CPU and GPU, even though the CPU is staying well within check. But either way, I was actually planning on holding off on taking this thing apart because I want to do a full-on upgrade, CPU and storage and whatnot. But since I had seen the GPU running at nearly or at 200 degrees Fahrenheit, I want to get that fixed now and do the upgrades a little later, especially considering once I get this thing opened up, I can actually set this thing up in a way to where I get those upgrades I'm talking about. I can just easily pull the thing apart and whatnot. So with that said, I'm actually going to start the process of taking this thing apart. I'm not going to show how to do it because, well, there are YouTube videos out there that more properly show how to do the actual teardown of this thing. I just want to record what I do and see if I can get any better performance. What I want to try and do is to keep the GPU at around 180, 170. I know if I run the new Dawn tech demo, I can probably get it to go like 205 degrees Fahrenheit. But I'm not going to do that because running it at 200 is something I don't want to do. And also the noise from the fan is very audible. So that's another thing I want to deal with. With that said, that's also due to the horrible fan tuning that Apple does on their iMacs. There is a program called Mac Fan Control I can use on this, and I am going to do that. But I'm going to do that after I get all this testing done because this is the before, and I want to have a stock after. So I'm going to get this thing prepped up to be taken apart, and I'll come back. For giggles, I am going to run the new Dawn demo, but not for long because, as you can see, 203 degrees Fahrenheit. I obviously do not like running it that hot, so obviously that would be another way to have a before and after. So now I'm going to get this thing set up to be taken apart. After I have my food, so like maybe 45 minutes from now, maybe an hour from now, dependent. Alright, so now I'm in the kitchen, so we'll have to put up the noises from the kitchen stuff and whatnot. So first thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make a little bracer. That way so I can have something goes right here to stop the screen from doing this as I'm actually taking it apart. iFixit makes or sells one, but it's like $20 and I can make one for like $1 or so out of foam board, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to get that kind of situated and I'll figure out how I'm going to do it. Then I'll come back and try and explain how exactly I got the curve and whatnot correct. Well, I thought I'll come back and explain how I did this, but it's a lot more difficult to put together than I initially thought, and I can't remember how I did it. But I made the little stand, and I have it to where I can so easily pull it off because I will be at least pulling this thing apart one more time. So that's why I made this stand a little more durable than I would if I was going to be a one-time use. So the next step for me to do is actually cut the adhesive. Now, as of right now, I don't have that little adhesive cutter wheel from iFixit, but I can make something that can do the job just fine. And it's going to be using this plastic bottle right here. I'm going to cut it in a way to where I'll be able to cut the adhesive while also not going too deep into the actual screen and whatnot. I have actually cut one of these open before over my Free Geek, but it was like a 21-inch model. So I already have a general idea of how to do this. I just gotta make sure I don't go too deep. And if I do go too deep, that's why I'm gonna be using this plastic. That way, so if I do, I'll be able to deform and whatnot. So I'm gonna cut this plastic bottle and then cut the shape and cut everything and come back. And here's the shape I cut it into. I cut a little bit of a circular pattern on this edge right here, and then I left the other edges like this right here for sharpness. That way, so I can plunge it in with this side first, do the initial cuts, and then plunge this side in to do the final cuts and whatnot. And it looks like I need to go about maybe that far deep into the actual screen to get everything to cut, while also missing the actual LCD screen itself. So with that said, I'm going to shut this down. I'm going to get a towel so I can actually lay the screen on it and whatnot. Get some rubber gloves because I'm not going to be fucking with that power supply. And I will come back in a little bit. Alright, and with the screen taken off, there's not as much dust in this thing as I initially thought. There is some right here. It's not completely filled like I would have thought it would be, but then again, it's kind of to be expected considering how relatively fast the hard drive is, which makes me think again, this thing just has not been used that much. But I'll deal with taking this thing apart in a little while because I actually want to watch Fritz's live stream on the Corporate Chill / Salt Awards for 2023. Small stuff, but stuff I'm interested in. Also, I kind of want to let this thing discharge for a little bit. Now, I know discharging something like this is basically going to take like a couple years, but I just want to let it discharge for a little while. Plus, again, this is interesting. Well, it definitely took a little while to take apart, but luckily this is going to be only happening in our time, so at least I know how to do it now. So with that said, let's go to the motherboard. Here's the motherboard. It's somewhat dirty, as to be expected. And if I flip it over, it's relatively fine. So I'm going to go through the process of de-dusting the motherboard, de-dusting the speakers, same thing with the power supply, clean up the fan, and of course, clean up the inside of the actual iMac and whatnot. Especially the little intake right here, which desperately needs it. Actually, I believe this is the exhaust. I don't know for certain though. I don't know how the actual air is designed for this thing. I think the air gets intakes from the little slits right here at the bottom and then it gets shot out of this right here. But yeah, as you can see, it kind of needs a bit of a de-dust. Alright, got the CPU cleaned off. Got the GPU cleaned off as much as I want. When it comes to the VRAM, I'm just going to reapply some thermal paste and hope that will be enough. Eventually I will probably go and reapply thermal pads and whatnot. But since I don't have any of those right now, thermal paste should be more than enough for this. So the next step is to start putting the rest of this thing back together. So I'll come back when I get a opportunity to. And when it comes to that M.2 integration like I was talking about, there it is right there. So I'll just need to get a little adapter so I can actually use a normal M.2 and actually have 4 terabytes worth of flash storage on this thing. So I'll come back when I get this thing all put back together. Alright, everything is now put back together. So the next step is to reinstall the screen and see if I still have a working iMac. I'm fairly certain I do, but you just never know. Alright, with it back together, let's see if it does anything. Alright, I heard hard drive spin. It might, oh, there we go. Alright, looks like we're good to go. I don't think I showed this in the initial start of the video, but the idle temperatures are significantly reduced. They're idling in like the 120s or so, now it's idling in the 90s. And when it comes to the GPU, it's now idling in the 80s, when it was normally idling in the 120s. So it looks to be working completely fine. I'll let it sit here for a little while longer before I fully say anything, but the temperatures already seem to be significantly cooler than they used to be. Alright, the idle temps have gone up a little bit, but that's to be expected. I can tune the fans and whatnot to fit the way I need it, or fan in this one's case. But generally speaking, still the idle temperatures are significantly lower than they used to be. So with that, alright, so obviously the frame rate's going to stay the same, but what we're interested in is seeing what the temperatures are going to be like. One thing I definitely tell for certain though, is that the time it takes for the temperatures to actually rise is significantly lower than it used to be. It's probably still going capped to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's just due to the fan BIOS that Apple has for this thing, and I can fix that with Mac fan control. But for right now, I just want to see how everything works. And so far, everything's working just as expected. Alright, so we're almost done with the full rotation of the, there it is, full rotation of the deck demo is done. And we're hovering in 187 degrees Fahrenheit. and I actually saw it dip because it was actually at 189. So I think now everything's kind of less stabilized, which is honestly quite impressive. And the noise from the fan, it's noticeable, but not like it used to be. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to let this run for like 30 minutes and we'll come back. I will come back at 10:20 p.m. and we'll see what the temperatures are like, but it looks like everything's stabilized. Alright, it is 10:20 more or less, and the temperatures seem to be pretty much stabilized. This is where they're hovering at right now, and generally speaking, that's actually an improvement. Granted, it's only 5 degrees cooler, but that's because I'm using the stock fan control that Apple uses. So now I'm going to download Mac fan control and configure the fans for a more proper curve so the thing doesn't run this ludicrously hot. Alright, got Mac fan control up and running, and if I go to sensor base, you can see I have it set to the GPU. So I have it set to where it's going to be 90 to 160. When it gets to 160, the fan goes to full bore. So with that said, I'll be able to relaunch the NVIDIA Tech demo, and we'll see what the temperature is like with the new fan curve. So I'll come back in a little while. Another thing I did is I went into the little settings right here and I turned off ultra mode. That way so I can get just a little bit more higher FPS. That should help maybe keep the temperatures down a little bit more, but it really shouldn't affect anything. I just want to have more higher FPS. Alright, a little more time has passed and it seems like everything's idling around 181 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 10 degrees cooler than what it was originally. And of course, the reason why it's running at 180 instead of 190 is because the fan kicked on significantly more sooner than it would before. And it's able to kind of maintain itself even more. So the next step for me to do is to take this thing back into my room and play Sea of Thieves on this thing, and we'll see what Sea of Thieves runs at. Because it should theoretically run significantly cooler now. I mean, heck, even the CPU is running significantly cooler. But then again, this tech demo really only hits the GPU and not the CPU, so I'll be right back. Alright, and playing Sea of Thieves, temperatures are about the same when it comes to running the new Dawn demo, so it's nice to see the reapplied thermal paste absolutely did the job that I wanted it to. So I think that's a job well done on my part.